So, that language I started learning at the beginning of the year is, drumroll, Portuguese. Why Portuguese, you may ask? Well, when I decided to learn Italian, it was a toss-up between that and Portuguese. So here I am, just over 4 years later, to investigate my second choice. Before we start, I apologise for any Portuguese pronunciation mistakes I make. They could well be egregious at this stage of my learning. Now, Duolingo teaches Brazilian Portuguese because European versions of some languages aren't as profitable, so they're ignored or cancelled, or whatever term you prefer. But I want to use European Portuguese because, surprise, I live in Europe. Can you do this with Duolingo? Well, it's not exactly easy, but I'm giving it a go. Of course, you have to find out what the differences are. I'm going to go through some of what I've learnt whilst playing me doing the end of unit exercises, somewhere on the screen. They start off well and gradually get worse. The biggest thing to note with the pronunciation differences, saying things the European way will still get you a tick on the pronunciation exercises, mostly, but I have to think about it quite carefully first. And let's be clear, in my opinion, knowing both versions is not a bad thing. After all, I know both in Spanish, and force myself to keep to European pronunciation. I'm not going to go through those pronunciation differences here, but I will link to a video in the description where I learnt about them. It's always good to actually hear people saying the words. I mean speakers of the language saying the words, rather than me. One of the big issues is that European Portuguese doesn't commonly use você for you, which is used a lot on Duolingo, because the Brazilians use it a lot. European Portuguese prefer tu, and neither use the plural you. Europeans also don't use the a gente form, a Brazilian way of saying we. You will have no choice but to use these on the app in certain sentences. There's no way of getting around it. But where you can use tu instead, so far I've found that it works. Now let's think about the similarities to both Spanish and Italian, and possibly a bit of French, and maybe something else. This section is probably going to jump about a lot as I'm adding things as I go along. The first thing is that Portuguese is a slight outlier for its version of the indefinite article, as it uses an M instead of an N. So you have and uma. But M is barely pronounced, so you have that to contend with. But remembering this has not been a problem for me. The first thing that really did do my head in was the female singular version of the definite article. That is a. Yes, you have to say a for the. I still sometimes have a moment of confusion with some sentences with that. The full set is o, os, and a and ash. Right, what about some of the words? What are they closest to? I'd say mainly Spanish, but some lean more towards Italian. The thing is, some words are written the same way, but said differently, and some are said similarly, but written differently. And all of that depends on whether you're thinking of Brazilian or European Portuguese. Have I confused you yet? Have I confused myself? Here's an example. The word for milk is, somewhere on the screen now. The Brazilian pronunciation is something like leche. Sounds a little like leche in Spanish. The Portuguese has a hint of the Italian about it. Lette. However, overall, I think the sound of Portuguese is so different from the others that, like my experience with French and Italian, as opposed to Spanish and Italian, it's much harder to get it confused with any of the others. So Spanish is more comparable with words, but what about grammatical structures? Well, I'm not that far through the course yet, but the impression I'm getting is that the more complicated ones of those are closer to Italian. If you know Italian, you'll know that if you say something is mine, you have to add in the in most instances. So you'll say il mio vestito. Whereas in Spanish, you just say mi vestido. And French, ma robe. Portuguese does both, as in you can do either. But according to that video I mentioned earlier, European Portuguese tends to use the construction most of the time. So it would be o meu vestido. Another thing that's similar to Italian is that it combines prepositions with other words, such as the. You might get the odd instance of these in Spanish and French, but not like Italian or Portuguese. Now, I have a bit of a beef with Duolingo on this one because in the notes it shows a meaning two. Yes, it means more than one thing, combined with the. But this section introduces two others that haven't been mentioned before. In, usually meaning in or on, no, na, nor, nat, plus por, meaning for, by, through, with the, becoming pelo, pela, pelos, pelas. If I hadn't learnt Italian previously and recognised the similarity to nel, nella, etc., I don't know how well I would have understood what was going on. In the end, I went onto the web and searched for an explanation. They could easily have listed all of these in the notes, but they didn't. I have since looked at the old Portuguese notes on Duome, and they look to be quite detailed, so I'm definitely going to be referring to them when I don't get something as I go forward. I'll link them in the description. One thing that's more similar to French. Portuguese uses a lot of different accents on the letters, both acute and grave accents, the tilde, the circumflex, and the cedilla. I still haven't properly worked out what each one of these is actually doing, except I think the tilde, which I've only seen on vowels, might be designating a nasal sound. But I'm sure that'll become clearer as I continue. I think Portuguese is probably going to be on a par with Italian with working out how things are pronounced, rather than Spanish, where every pronunciation of a letter or word is set. So that should be fun. And then there's that one word I've discovered that's very like Welsh. Cadeira is a chair in Portuguese, and cader is the word in Welsh. I suppose the other one that's closer to this is French with chaise, but Spanish and Italian went in a completely different direction with Celia and Sedia. Some of this course reminds me very much of the Italian course, where I was bombarded with a ton of verbs in one section of the path, or the tree as it was then. This makes me think that the Portuguese course hasn't had a lot of updates since the path came in. A lot of verbs are recognisable with my knowledge of 3 other Romance languages, but I haven't got a true handle on the verb conjugations yet, especially the irregular verbs. Plus, there seem to be a lot of verbs for putting things on and taking them off. One thing that is different about using possessive pronouns is specifically where they can appear. So you could get o gatto delle, de elle, the cat of him, to, I believe I have this right, to indicate that there might be some other options. So it could have been someone else's. Whereas putting it before, o seu gatto, means there aren't any other possibilities. This will take a bit of getting used to, too, and I only found it out by using the notes on Duome. So that's what I know about Portuguese so far. Honestly, I think trying to get the pronunciation right is my biggest problem at the moment. But I have one thing that helps me with that, which I may talk about next month.